Welcome to episode 82 of the Half Point Per podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and our producer, Johnny Pham. Guys, that was sure a week one to remember this weekend for a lot of just real football reasons to start off with. We have one tie, another almost tie, where I think there were probably like four missed kicks in the last 15 minutes and 10 seconds of that game. It was a lot to take in week one, and we're here to break it all down from a fantasy perspective. Dalton, how are you doing after just a whirlwind of a week one?
All my bets on the early game slate missed. So that was a great start to my week one. But in fact, Thursday night, my boy Allen Robinson did his best Chicago Bears impression and really just didn't care to be on the field. And Cooper Kupp decided to just take over that game.
No. Allen Robinson was on the field.
Correct. Process is still there. Maybe Allen Robinson will come back around. And I'm going to be honest, that noon slate was kind of miserable to watch for a while. And then the 3 o'clock slate was just blowouts. And it kind of wasn't the most fun, but I'm glad NFL's back.
Johnny, I'm not sure what happened to your audio between before pod and now. You were very loud just there, so something to monitor. But yeah, I'm obviously with you, Dalton. That noon slate went from like a 3 to a 9 extremely quickly. And you know what? Let's just jump right into the fantasy stuff this week. And where I want to start is probably one of the most boring games of the weekend. The Vikings and Packers just ho-hum. Vikings totally kicking their butt. Feel vindicated that the HPPP parlay that never makes it past Thursday night at least had Vikings +1. We at least had that going for us. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you got that early too. That ended up being Green Bay +1.5 by kickoff. So
oh wow,
we were ahead of the sharps on that one, or at least the HPP parlay by you was. So
well, I'd like to think I set the market on the Vikings then. So the Packers looked like crap, kind of becoming a week one tradition for this group. And I think where I want to start, I don't really have much of an interest in breaking down the receivers because there was no Allen Lazard. Poor Christian Watson could have had an unbelievable debut, and it was pretty terrible because of his drop. But Dalton, we have an AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones situation at least developing enough to where I've seen real people tweet about it on fantasy football Twitter. Do you believe that AJ Dillon has supplanted Aaron Jones as the top fantasy running back in this backfield after 1 week?
This is a tough one for me for a lot of reasons, starting off with some preseason takes I may or may not have had. Loved both these guys, and I did say that I think both of them will end the season as top 12 backs as a wild take. I still think that's the situation. If you watched that game, I think you come away saying they need to run more 12 and 21 personnel and keep these wide receivers off the field as much as possible. Because, I mean, like you said, that Christian Watson touchdown that he dropped probably hurt them a lot. And then the Romeo Doubs pick probably hurt them a lot. And I think this team is going to lean heavier on their best playmakers, and A.J. Dillon certainly looked like one of them. I am more than happy to say that A.J. Dillon has supplanted Aaron Jones in the backfield, but I don't think that that's going to tank Aaron Jones' value. I think that both of these are going to be the most valuable fantasy pieces by a mile in this offense going forward. That would be my take.
So wait, so are you saying AJ Dillon, if you had to rank them, you'd rank AJ Dillon higher than Aaron Jones rest of season just right now?
No, I'm not ready to go that far.
Okay.
But if I were to rank them weekly, I mean, both deserve to be in the top 15, I would say. I don't think.
And that's kind of my take too, is I don't quite believe it yet. I really want to because I came really close to just having that be a hot take of mine before the season, that Dillon finished higher than Jones this season. 10 carries and the more concerning thing from an Aaron Jones perspective is Dylan got a team high 5 targets, which it's kind of crazy that 5 is the team high for the Packers with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback this week, but that's a story for another day. The actual raw snaps were 51 AJ Dillon, 61 Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones was still on the field plenty, but he only got 5 carries, 3 targets, and I think it was either 2 or 3 receptions. I think it was like 23 targets between the two of them. LaFleur's already said today that the box score is telling me that I did a terrible job of getting my best players the ball, basically, and I'd agree with that. I just want to be careful with jumping full bore on the AJ Dillon is greater than Aaron Jones after 1 week, because it would have been a bad look for you by season's end to jump to too many week 1 conclusions about the Packers the last couple of years. Wasn't that Bucs game? It wasn't week 1, but it was like week 2 or week 3 in the season before last. Like they've had some early season stinkers, and this is a team that without Lazard, they're already thin and young at receiver. They don't have Alan Lazard. I just think it was a tough spot for them week 1. They'll be a team to monitor going forward here. But I'm glad you said both should be top 15 guys, because I was literally going to say, if you rank Aaron Jones as RB13, Dillon should be RB14. Like I would do the cop out, put him back to back with Jones as the slight edge if I were doing weekly ranks.
Well, and if you're an Aaron Jones owner, or if you're me, to feel a little vindicated, all of AJ Dillon's targets came out of the backfield, which is like a no-duh proposition. Mm-hmm. But 2 of Aaron Jones' targets came out when he lined up in the slot. And when Aaron Jones lined up as a wide receiver, he was shadowed by Patrick Peterson 52% of his snaps, which is like insane that the Vikings were shadowing with their best corner on the running back for the Packers. And I do think that does play a part of it. Like the Vikings game plan was clearly don't let Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon win the game and make their rookies win them the game, which lost them the game. I think going forward, especially with Lazard, we can have a way more efficient outing from Aaron Jones, and it's going to take the pressure off both him and AJ Dillon. Like that red zone carry AJ Dillon had, the Vikings just sold out for the run because they knew there was nobody in that offense they were going to target and they were going to throw the ball to in that red zone opportunity.
The troubling thing for Jones, just to project forward, though, is not only the targets. I mean, if he's getting out targeted by Dillon on a weekly basis, which I don't think that'll happen, but if it's even a dead even split, I think AJ Dillon is like the no-brainer goal line back at this point in most situations. So that wouldn't be a great look for Aaron Jones and his value. But yeah, I think there will be more efficient outings for Aaron Jones in the future. More big plays to be had. It's just definitely a situation that everybody should have on their radars at this point of the season, I think.
Yeah, if there is an AJ Dillon owner out there who's like selling him as what he was drafted at, which on ESPN this morning I saw he was RB33 in ADP. Like you should probably be going after that. I would be trying to still buy low because it's not like AJ Dillon had an amazing day if you just look at his raw stats. So definitely still a buy low if you think you can get your hands on him.
I don't know. I do think he finished as like the RB10 or something. So
oh wow, never mind.
It's just because of the touchdown, and he had the receptions to back it up. But the actual like yardage totals and the yards per touch, like the efficiency, was not good. I've got to say, last thing on this though, I'm just always impressed every time I watch Dillon, how good he looks as a pass catcher for a guy his size. He is probably. Like I think he's a decent bit bigger than Barkley, but he and Saquon are like the 2 guys that are just specimens, and also like wow, these guys can really catch the ball and they look smooth running routes out of the backfield. Dillon's not in that category of Barkley, but just to even be the next category below that is pretty darn good.
Yeah, well, just for size, he looks good. Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll say just about the Packers in general is if he's on your waivers, which he likely is, I really think you need to go after Robert Tonyan. He only played in 11 personnel. He only played 36% of the snaps, and he saw 6 targets in 36% of the snaps, and he's just coming back from that ACL injury. Mm-hmm. I really think that the Packers need him, and he's a good enough pass catcher that he's probably going to get a lot of work, and we know Aaron Rodgers trusts him. I think that he could be a late come on at the tight end position for a lot of teams.
The Packers need anybody and everybody who is able to produce. And boy,
is that Odell Beckham music?
Speaking of a team that needs anybody and everybody, although real quick, I'll say, don't give up on Aaron Jones yet, Dark Dan. There's still plenty of good Aaron Jones days ahead, I think.
Yeah, I think only better days come. That offense was at an all-time low, and Aaron Jones still came out there and got you some points.
But speaking of a team that needs anybody and everybody, the Dallas Cowboys are the very definition of that right now. What an absolute tire fire that was for that team in week 1. And then injury added to the insult, rather, is Dak Prescott is now out for an undetermined amount of time. It was originally 6 to 8 weeks. Now Jerry Jones is saying, well, maybe 4 weeks. Regardless, Dak is out for a little while. Cooper Rush, who wasn't even on the active roster, the Cowboys had to do like some tricky practice squad stuff to get him up as the second quarterback before the game the other day. He's looking like the guy right now, unless Mike McCarthy acts on that list of quarterbacks he mentioned the other day. Maybe Jimmy Garoppolo is a target, but regardless of who the quarterback is for the next month or so, we know it's not going to be Dak. Is CeeDee Lamb the only must-start Cowboy until Dak Prescott returns, Dalton?
I'm questioning if CeeDee Lamb is a must-start. If we're being completely honest, like I understand where you drafted him, and you probably have to for a lot of reasons, but I don't want any of the Cowboys. I mean, the injury to the left tackle was really evident in how it hindered their game. Dalton Schultz just did Dalton Schultz things, which was like 5-yard out routes over and over again, and got his points there, but he's never going to be a game breaker, especially with Cooper Rush at quarterback. Noah Brown, for what he was worth, didn't look great. Jalen Tolbert, inactive. You have, I mean, there's just nobody on this roster worth starting. Tony Pollard, for all of the offseason, he's going to play in the slot and be a wide receiver. Didn't happen. He also missed like 2 critical pass blocks, which you hate to see from a guy you're trying to get playing time.
And that's why, even for as much as I'm on the side of Pollard being the more explosive player, at this point, that is why Zeke plays more than Tony Pollard, because Zeke is still an excellent pass protector. And that's why you look on the other side of the field, Leonard Fournette plays so much, because he can decleat Micah Parsons when Micah Parsons doesn't see him coming.
Yeah. Well, and the problem with this team, and this is like a rough look, but without Dak, without Tyron Smith, you look like top to bottom on their roster, and they might be the most talent efficient team in the NFC East, which is really hard to do. I mean, them and the Cowboys are fighting for it, and or the Giants are fighting for it, and it's hard to look at them and believe. And you have Mike McCarthy calling plays and Jerry Jones basically demanding that his head coach give 15 to 18 carries to the ghost of Zeke. So there's just nobody on this team that you can trust. If you have Zeke, I like him as a flex play because he has touchdown upside, but that pass blocking and that run blocking on that team is it's putrid. I mean, this offense is going nowhere fast.
Yep, and I'm with you on Lamb. I think you have to start him for now because you just drafted him in the second round. I know he just had a weird game there. Just played. I know he is in a really tough spot in that teams can literally put like two guys on him and shade another guy toward him on every route, essentially, because there is nobody else that is scaring you until Michael Gallup gets back in that receiving room. But Lamb just did not look good the other night. I'm hoping that's just a one-off for him.
Well, and I'm not ready to like put the nail in the coffin as CeeDee Lamb is an elite wide receiver, but there are other guys who've performed with bad quarterback play and getting double coverage. I mean, AJ Green, Hopkins are some obvious guys who were in very similar situations. And CeeDee Lamb just didn't, like, he got 9 targets. It wasn't like he wasn't on the field getting targeted. He was getting targets. He was dropping the pass. He wasn't getting enough separation. And, like, overall, he just looked defeated as a player. Like, he knew he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. And it is a little concerning going forward that we did, as a fantasy community, elevate him in that, like, elite wide receiver status. And from what we saw in week 1, I don't know if he really has it. I'm waiting for Matt Harmon to do a film breakdown of how he looked.
I don't think I've ever seen Matt Harmon be more upset about something than he was about the group of surrounding talent around CeeDee Lamb after week one. I think he called it a joke or a clown show or something
Yes.
in his 5 things. It's pretty bad. The thing with Zeke is he's going to have weeks where you're happy you started him as an RB2, but I know it's the Bucks and the Bucks are really good against the run, but he's the RB48 in week one. And I don't think I would have ever thought that Tony Pollard could be the RB59 and play over half of the snaps, but he pulled that off the other night. They're not going to get held to 3 points every week, even with Cooper Rush at quarterback. So there is hope and upside for those guys, but it's a scary proposition. I think Pollard has got to be a bench until proven otherwise. And then Zeke, you probably roll him out there next week. But if it's another terrible showing by the whole team and by him, you're going to have to reassess. And then I'm with you. Dalton Schultz was the tight end 10 this week, which is fine. But that's a lot with Dak and all on volume. And you're just basically hoping for an empty calories volume game from Dalton Schultz on a week-to-week basis to be relevant, which were before with Dak, you're starting him pretty much no-brainer every week.
Yeah. And if your bet right now is that Jason Peters comes off in street clothes next week, plays left tackle, and that offensive line returns to last year's offensive line. And that is the bet that you have to make if you are a Zeke owner or a CD owner. And then CD runs out of the slot entirely with Cooper Rush when Michael Gallup returns next week or in 2 weeks. I mean, those are your best upside situations. And even then, I mean, these guys cap out at like running back 15 and wide receiver 20 at this point.
Look, there's got to be something really wrong with Will Fuller physically, mentally, like just all around for him not to have gotten a call from this team at this point. Their receivers are so bad. Okay. On to another NFC East team. We have 2 Giants topics today. Pretty unbelievable, but they were kind of a polarizing team in week one.
Brian Dabble.
Saquon Barkley. Dalton, is this a top 5 running back going forward?
You know what? Yeah, I think so.
I agree with you.
Let's go. Here's the thing. I was skeptical when Saquon reached back up into like the 3rd round because it was almost like, what if, he's not? But what happened was he got a competent offensive coach in Brian Dabble who looked at that team and said, you're the best player by a mile. So we're going to use you like the best player. He led the team in targets. He looked like a step faster. I mean, legitimately, if you look at Saquon Barkley 2 years ago and Saquon Barkley this year, he looks a lot the same before his injury. I think he's recovered from the ACL. He has a step on guys. That run for the extra or the touchdown to tie the game where he got a face mask.
Yep.
I mean, that was vintage Saquon. He had one where he ran down the left sideline and he was just smoking guys. And this is on a team like without a lot of pass catchers with Daniel Jones at quarterback. I mean, I'm in love with it. I think he's a top 5 running back going forward. He is getting the targets on this team. I don't see how you don't start him every week and feel so comfortable about it.
Yep. He played 83% of the team snaps, which was the most of any running back in the league this week. I think maybe Fournette would have topped that if you take out garbage time in that game. But regardless, I mean, he's the workhorse of all workhorses right now through 1 week at least in the NFL. You mentioned that big run and the explosiveness. He was clocked as the 2nd fastest player in the league this week on that run at 21.11 miles per hour, tied with Joe Mixon on his run where he and Minka met up near the goal line. Would you believe the fastest player in week one was Chase Claypool on a 12-yard run? Isn't that weird?
Incredible that he got that fast?
Isn't that weird?
That is incredible.
21.46 miles per hour on a 12-yard run.
Was that one of the sweeps though, where he probably had 6 yards? So it was like,
he probably ran more like 30 yards, but I was still like, wow, on a 12-yard run, this guy got to 21.5.
Yeah, and I know we're not talking about him, but our big slot predictions, I think Chase Claypool's an every week flex guy, but
he could be if he gets 5 carries a game. That'll help. That'll help. But everyone who's listened to the podcast from the beginning knows my feelings on Saquon. he was my number one ranked player ahead of Christian McCaffrey going into, I guess, the 2020 season. And it obviously didn't work out and didn't work out last year. And that's been mostly injuries and some situation. The situation is at least a little bit better. The offensive line still looked pretty bad the other day, but you would hope that as the season goes on, and you would hope with the Bengals that the same is true with them as well, that the group gels and improves a little bit throughout the season.
Well, and they did. I mean, despite what happened in the offseason to that Titans offensive or defensive line, it was still like the second best run blocking or run defending unit last year. Mm-hmm. They're a very good defensively coached team. And Saquon to do that behind not the greatest offensive line means a lot. And for what it's worth, Daniel Jones looked like Brian Dabble was putting him in a situation to succeed, which was like short passes and just letting his guys get yak, which I'm completely okay with it, especially if you're a Giants fan and like hoping for positivity. It's Brian Dabble said, we're going to keep the ball out of Daniel Jones' hands and give it to everybody else on this team.
And it's not like he had the big run. I think it was 68 yards. He was still 17 for 96 outside of that against a good rush defense. So he was just good all the way around. He had 6 catches, 30 yards. He was at about a 75% route participation. I mean, this is a guy that was either right below or right above 100 catches his rookie season. We know that he can catch the ball. We know that he can produce in the passing game. If he's getting this type of workload, I mean, the ceiling is back to the RB1 overall, which is what I've been hoping for.
3 years ago, it was you and me debating if Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley was the RB1 for what it's worth, you know.
And as long as McCaffrey bounces back a little bit from a week 1 that was not his fault, I would say his team's fault. We could very well be debating those two guys 3 years later as the top 2, top 3 if you include Jonathan Taylor, which we should in that group in the league this season. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm happy for Saquon and happy for all of us to get to watch Saquon because I think he's my favorite running back just to watch in the NFL.
I agree.
He just does some alien crap. he's just
electric.
He's just unbelievable for a guy that size. Okay, Dalton, James Robinson. I felt like probably both of us, but more so me, I was just a doubter at every step of the way this offseason. Like, is he really going RB 42 in the middle of July? Like, I couldn't believe it. And then is he really going to play week 1? Look at how he's walking in this Twitter video in training camp. Is this guy really even close to ready? And then he just goes out there, ho-hum, 11 carries, 66 yards, scores a touchdown, looked every bit the same as the old James Robinson, which, to be clear, he's not the most explosive player. He is kind of in that Chris Carson mold of bruising back, but he still produced like he always does when he gets the chance. And that kind of brings us to this question. Do we believe that James Robinson is the running back that you want in Jacksonville going forward? And I believe it. I say yes. The touches were 12-6, favoring Robinson to Travis Etienne. It was 13-8 just in terms of opportunities if you include targets. Etienne had a brutal drop that should have been a touchdown. And we would think of his week a lot differently if he catches that or Trevor Lawrence hits him in the corner of the end zone for what should have been another touchdown earlier in the game. So brutal swing for Etienne, but it just doesn't look like the Achilles injury matters to James Robinson at all. He just looks like the same guy. And you would think the snaps were 49 Robinson, 51 Etienne, which I don't have the full breakdown, but that would lead me to believe that they were never on the field at the same time, which, if that's how they're going to play going forward, could be a problem for Etienne, because I think common sense would tell you that week 1, less than a year removed from the Achilles tear, would be James Robinson's, have a great chance to be Robinson's lowest snap percentage game. And he was already in a 50-50. And it could shift more to a 60-40. And my concern with Etienne now is he's going to be a guy that might need those explosive plays to come through for you on a week-to-week basis. And I just don't know. I just don't know if he has that ability to do that consistently, and the offense that he's in, I'm not sure is going to set him up for that on a week-to-week basis. Robinson is the safer play, and he's the guy I'd want going forward in this backfield. Crazy as that is to say after 1 week.
Yeah, and I agree entirely. I mean, it's hard to overreact to week one. You never should. But the thing is, this is a running back coming off an Achilles tear. His counterpart, who also is coming off an Achilles tear, Cam Akers, got 3 carries for 0 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And nuance does matter here. And I think that at least I didn't do my due diligence on the James Robinson injury. It was a partial Achilles tear. That's also what Sterling Shepard had. I don't know. He also had a really good return. He had a really explosive 67-yard run.
Well, and to be fair to Cam Akers, we just don't know yet if he was being eased back in because he's been dealing with the soft tissue stuff all training camp.
Yeah.
So that could be a factor, or it might not be. We just don't know at this point yet.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. But I don't think this is like a normal – it's just not – I wrote it off as an Achilles tear. It's a partial. It changed the rehab process for it. Probably led to him – it did lead to him being undervalued all offseason. But I agree with you entirely. I think in a lot of ways Etienne probably put himself in the coach's doghouse. Like, it's hard to call that one touchdown pass a drop even because he had it in his hands and he spiked the ball. And it's so frustrating for a team with a losing culture like Jacksonville to have a game so winnable in their hands and to watch like one of their players throw it away and then to watch James Robinson come in and get 2 of their 3 touchdowns. And there were a lot of miscues on that team. Not from Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion. I thought Trevor Lawrence looked great in a lot of ways as a total aside.
Outside of the one ball he flowed over Etienne in the corner of the end zone, I thought Lawrence looked pretty good.
And even there, I don't know if you've listened to Matt Waldman this week yet, but Matt Waldman talked about that play. And if he rewatched the whole play and then I went back and found the all 22 of it, Etienne beats his guy and slows down. And I think Trevor Lawrence wanted him just to go to the back of the end zone on a normal wheel route, which was the play. And I'm not going to go into that and say that Etienne ran the incorrect route, but it just looked like him and Etienne were not in sync, which is part of the narrative for drafting Etienne was, he played with this guy in college and they were together. And then James Robinson comes in, catches a passing touchdown, runs more effectively, runs like he was running a year ago, and doesn't have Urban Meyer just pulling him randomly. So I really like James Robinson. He's probably like a consensus top 16 back week in, week out, in my opinion, especially with the way some backfields were unfolded this week.
I'd rather start him than Zeke the next month. I can tell you that for sure.
Absolutely. I'd rather start him than whoever's in San Francisco, whoever's in Los Angeles for the Rams. I mean, there's some scary situations out there.
Careful. Jordan Mason Hive is coming for you.
Oh, Jordan Mason Hive is coming.
Okay, we're in agreement on Robinson. We've been in agreement on all of these. I feel like this is where we might divert, but we'll see. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 2 receiving touchdowns on Sunday. I'd have to go back and look, but I'd have to imagine he's never done that in a game before. I did go back and look, and his 3 receptions are tied for the most he had in any game last season, and he only topped that number 4 times as a rookie. So we have some positive indicators for CEH, but Dalton, are you ready to start or to trust him as an every week fantasy starter?
I really want to say yes. I do. And I've been number 1 CH truther. I think I had him as RB1 2 years ago for a little while. So I've been there. No. And it's because what I've said all offseason.
I was really hoping you were going to say yes.
I just can't yet. Jerick McKinnon is there, and Jerick McKinnon is actually really good. If you watch the plays Jerick McKinnon had, him and CH were pretty similar. The difference was CH got 2 touchdowns if you look at their fantasy stat lines. But Jerick McKinnon was run out of the backfield. He was an effective runner. If you were a CH owner and you drafted him where he was like RB26, you were already getting a screaming value because he's being utilized effectively this time. He's being run out wide. He's getting those passing snaps, which you really want. And the Chiefs are running more 12 personnel, which just gives him more lanes in that gap runs. My concern, and I think Patrick Mahomes was telling us the truth when he said this, was that this offense is going to be different every week in who they give the ball to other than Travis Kelce. And CH is going to be one of those guys who you're probably going to have 2 catches for 20 yards and 10 carries for 50. And I mean, that's not a good fantasy
Well,
performance.
he had 7 carries for 42 yards. Now I know the plug was put on him before the fourth quarter, and that's a point that I wanted to make in this conversation. If you didn't watch the game and you're just doing like snap percentage hunting this week, you can't pay attention to the Chiefs backfield because CH was like at 39%. I think McKinnon was right around there, but CH was the pure starter. McKinnon was the pure third down back. Pacheco played maybe 3 snaps in the first half and then played the whole fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, Pacheco looked good. Like,
he did.
But I don't think he's worth a roster spot in a redraft league. He's a pure handcuff, and I think McKinnon gets the work before him if CEH goes down. And I mean, this game was such a blowout. I mean, it was probably the most lopsided game entire week 1. And I'm not saying that as a Chiefs fan. Like,
it was 37-7 or 30-7, whatever it was at one point. It was over midway through the third quarter. It was over early in the third quarter.
Yeah, I mean, even at the end of the second, it just didn't look good for the Cardinals. And I do think it's hard to surmise a lot coming out of this. Like, Juju Smith-Schuster, like, might have had a really big day if they played a full competitive game with the way he was getting targeted.
I think he had 5 receptions their first 3 drives, and then they basically didn't need him after that.
Well, yeah, and Sky Moore's snap percentage went up very quickly in the second and third because I think they just wanted to see what they had. You have the Chiefs running like the weirdest plays to Clyde Edwards-Helaire where they make the linebacker come across the line of scrimmage for a touchdown to him. Like, those things aren't, in my opinion, something you're going to see teams do every week against the Chiefs. So I'm just not ready to make any judgment calls on this for fantasy because the Cardinals, one, were the first team ever to blitz Patrick Mahomes in like 3 years. And that went terribly for them. And 2, the game was just so out of hand that Kansas City was just playing backyard football with them towards the end of the game.
Yeah. And that was my point too. I'm at a no just because I want to see it for a couple more weeks. I want to see a couple more good games and good usage from CEH. And the Chiefs only faced 8 third downs the whole game. And I don't have the number if you take out garbage time, but my guess is it was more like 6. And McKinnon's the third down back and was still playing not as much as CEH, but he was probably, I don't know, what would you say, 65-35?
Yeah. And I think he is worth a roster spot.
And if they're in a more competitive game script, maybe it's more like 60-40 between those two, with McKinnon maybe getting some more targets. I will say, just as something to watch, I don't know if this will ever develop, but the moment we see either McKinnon or CEH or both start to get the Kareem Hunt and Damian Williams route tree, mainly, can we get either of these guys starting to run that seam route out of the backfield that used to work so well for both of those guys? If either one of them starts doing that, I think it will change how I view them for fantasy, because that's just been such a home run play for running backs for Kareem Hunt and for Damian Williams early in the Mahomes era.
Well, that seam route, week 1 rookie season for Kareem Hunt, he scored a touchdown on that seam route against the Patriots. I remember that game with Alex Smith. If we can have guys running that, and I mean, you're right. If they start running a route tree like that, then you want them in fantasy.
We have a question here. Should I trade Debo and Waddle or St. Brown for Swift? Really solid at wide receiver and need big help at running back. First of all, yes, I would try and trade for DeAndre Swift. I don't think – I think you'd have to trade Waddle and St. Brown and get back Swift and something else. You could maybe pull off Debo straight up. And honestly – Waddle is kind of a sell high right now after week 1, because in redraft, I'm assuming this is redraft we're talking about here, because it was Tyreek Hill first, second, and third option. And I don't think Waddle got a target until he busted that long play for a touchdown late in the first half. It was a concerning start. Now, would it feel bad to sell Waddle and have him blow up? Maybe, but if you're getting DeAndre Swift back, I feel pretty darn good about who you're getting back if you can combine Waddle with somebody else. Doesn't have to be St. Brown, but just a second piece to get that deal done. I would definitely do it.
Yeah, I would be all about trading for Swift. He's one injury to Jamal Williams away from being like an every down back. He ran the best by a mile. He was PFF's highest graded running back in week 1. He was the sole reason the Lions got into the red zone twice on a 30 and a 45-yard run. He was involved in the pass game, and he's going to be playing behind an upgraded offensive line. They were missing 2 starters, and they still blocked really well. I am in concert with Evan. If you're trading anybody, I would definitely trade for him if your running backs are Hunt and CPAT.
Yep.
I would,
and maybe you could do Waddle and Cordell Patterson, and you don't upgrade your depth, but you obviously upgrade your high-end talent extremely with bringing in Swift at running back.
Yeah, and I don't know if you agree with this, Evan, but I don't really hate trading like Debo and Waddle for Swift and another piece. I think Debo's another guy that's not going to perform. Just watching that offense out of the 49ers, it's hard to draw any conclusions from it, but I'm a little skeptical of all of it. So I wouldn't even mind. I think Swift has a better way of winning you leagues than Debo would this year.
I agree. You would obviously need to get a big second piece back. So it's really, it's hard to just blanket statement say that without knowing what the other guy's roster looks like. Just make sure if you're trading both of those guys, you get Swift plus another pretty high-end fantasy starter, like a guy that's a locked and loaded starter every week.
Yeah.
Should I go ask for another piece or just Swift? Again, I just think it depends on that guy's team construction and what he needs to do, but he needs help at wide receiver. Then maybe you could try and double up St. Brown and Waddle and see what that can do for you.
Yeah, and I would probably even do Waddle and St. Brown just for Swift if you were to take that. I like that for you in a lot of ways.
Me too. Okay, Michael Thomas. Now, if this isn't where we disagree, we may not disagree the entire show. Believe it or not, Dalton, Michael Thomas, off of a 5 for 57 and 2 touchdown performance, should be a locked and loaded starter until further notice.
I liked what I saw. He played well. Only wide receiver with 2 touchdowns on the week, for what it's worth.
Yep.
Some people told you to sit him. I don't know who those people are. Never met them, never heard of them. But here are my concerns. First of all, I do just want to point this out. Chris Olave was a stud. At one point, he put AJ Terrell in the spin cycle in the end zone.
Jameis, can we look his way maybe more than 3 times from Chris Olave fantasy manager, please? Good Lord.
I want to call Michael Thomas a set it and forget it, and I do think Michael Thomas is back to like 70-80% of himself. My concern is that this offense is putrid. Like, it took 3 quarters for them to come out and score on a very bad Atlanta Falcons team. Like, I still don't think this is a good team. The only player doing anything for them was Grady Jarrett, and Jameis Winston had a negative EPA for 3 quarters until they got to this point. And I don't think Dennis Allen is doing a good job at coaching up this offense. And that is my bigger concern now. For a team that I picked as a dark horse playoff, they really, really sucked at being good offensively.
Yes.
It is hard to not just go up there and score points in Atlanta. It's a dome game.
Well,
we know what dome games are.
I'd have to go back and look at the stats, but just gonna guess on this because what's the harm? I think they had negative 2 yards passing at halftime. I think it was
net passing, but yes. That is my bigger concern at this point, is that I think if they play a competent team that does a better job at shadowing Michael Thomas now that he might be who he is, that Dennis Allen is not going to have an effective game plan, and that Jameis Winston, who is now turning into like late career Drew Brees with his like dunking it down the field instead of taking any shots, that this offense might just suck. And now Alvin Kamara is injured, and I don't know who they're going to run a running back. The ghost of Latavius Murray is in the practice squad. I'm very concerned.
Taysom Hill for the win in there. I believe it. I'm not ready to say that you should rank him where he finished last week, which was wide receiver 8. I'm not going to say he's a top 12 receiver, but I think he's a top 20. Set it and forget it right now. I mean, even more encouraging than the stat line is he just looked good. He looked like Michael Thomas to me. Quick release off the line of scrimmage. He was getting open with ease, and it finally came to fruition late in the game. And it wasn't like he was piling up these stats as in garbage time. He basically single-handedly brought them back in the game by getting open and giving terrible Jameis a place to throw to late in that game. Now, I will say, just looking at that team, I would sell Jarvis Landry off of the week he just had. That will probably be his best week of the season, over 100 receiving yards. But the other stuff from Michael Thomas is encouraging. Remember, he was dealing with the hamstring clear up until game day, and probably still is. But he was an 83% route participation. I think it was the snap share was a little bit lower than that, but he was out there for most of the passing plays. 26% target share. Like, that's what you want out of a number one receiver. And he had it in week one. I think he's top 20 for now. And I think we could revisit this in 3 weeks as long as the Saints aren't terrible and Thomas is healthy, and say, yeah, Michael Thomas is a top 12 receiver through a month, and this might be able to continue.
Yeah, and Tom Pelissero, who said that he was only going to see 20 to 30% of the snaps, and I took him out of my DraftKings lineup. Because of that, you need to reevaluate who you're listening to.
Nobody ever knows
No.
the answer to that kind of stuff, even if they hear it from a good source, because that stuff just changes. Like, Chris Godwin was on pace to play like 85% of the snaps before he pulled his hamstring in the third quarter, which perhaps that's why he pulled his hamstring. Maybe he should not have been doing that. But regardless, he was playing. He looked pretty good until he got hurt. And we didn't even know if he was going to play, much less if he was going to play more than like 10 snaps. So nobody ever knows the answers to those questions.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a pretty sad one. Kadarius Toney, I would say a favorite of both of ours, just from a pure talent perspective, from a pure entertainment perspective, to watch every time he touches the ball. It was bad last week. And when I say bad, I mean 12% of his team snaps bad. 0 targets bad. He had 2 carries for 23 yards, and thank God he got those, because he wasn't even a thought in the passing game. Dalton, would you look to sell Toney just off of the name value and the hope that kind of goes along with that, just being a young and talented receiver? Like, are you looking to get off this sinking ship, or are you hanging tight?
Well, for one, 25% of my underdog rosters have Kadarius Toney. And for anybody unfamiliar with that, you can't change your lineups. So he is there to stay. But I don't think you're going to pull a fast one over on anybody with Kadarius Toney. And like I said earlier, Saquon is the best player by a mile on this Giants team. Wan'Dale Robinson got a knee injury. We don't know the severity of it. He didn't return. He was going to play out of the slot. They are in need of help. The thing is, and this goes back to last year, Kadarius Toney definitely has some off-the-field problems. I don't know what they are.
Yeah, I mean, we got the full Kadarius Toney experience where the beat reporters are tweeting during the game that he's off by himself. Like, he's
literally sitting on the bench alone.
And he was not playing. So there were things happening even during the game where it's like, boy, like, this is like all of the bad stuff you hear about Toney just all blowing up in our faces in week one.
Yeah, but I do like Brian Daboll's coach. Like I said earlier, I think he's a really good coach. I think this is one of those opportunities where he was, you're sitting the whole game, you're going to learn a lesson, and I hope that this coaching staff brings him in, talks to him, because he truly, I mean, you watched him on the end around. It was literally like he's playing flag football the way people can't tackle him. Yeah. And I think if he starts to get like even 40 to 50% of the wide receiver snaps, he catches 2 passes and he could, take 2, like that Randy Moss line where it's like 185 for 2 touchdowns. He has that like after the catch ability in his hands, and he has a coach who can do that. So I'm not selling him because, of one, I don't know who's going to bite on that, and 2, I trust this coaching staff enough not to just doghouse him the entire season and to utilize his skill set. The other positive is Darius Slayton was a healthy scratch. That does show me that, like, at least if you're going pecking order, Toney is above Slayton on it right now, and they have a similar enough skill set that he can work his way in. I just hope that this is like a learning opportunity for young Jock.
Anytime you get a young Jock reference, It's always a good time. So I'm with you that I'm still holding. And I'm not going to lie. It would be tempting if I could get much of anything to just sell, but I don't think you probably can. So I think you're probably just standing at the top of the Titanic as it's sinking into the ocean and just hoping to God there's a lifeboat that you can hop onto at some point with this.
Let's play a fun game.
Well,
I have Josh Palmer.
Okay.
Would you trade Kadarius Toney for Josh Palmer straight up? This is a fun one for me.
Well, and I was going to ask you, maybe the better question is, are we looking to buy Kadarius Toney at all? So this is a good
for cheap. I would, yeah,
a good conversation. I don't think I'm trading Palmer for Kadarius Toney right now.
Well, I wouldn't, but that's me being addicted to Josh Palmer.
Yes.
But I would trade a J.D. McKissick for a Kadarius Toney if that team needs help at running back, or a Kenyon Drake for Kadarius Toney. These trades, I think you could get by with making. Dalton Schultz for Kadarius Toney, depending on what you're looking at tight end, I might consider especially if you can get another asset back, just because I'm very low on what Schultz is going to look like the rest of the season. Those are, I would do things like that. I would definitely be looking to trade for him, but you just have to know that the floor is the basement when it comes to outcomes.
The floor is he's off your team in 2 weeks. So don't give up anything of significance for him. As long as you're trading an end of the bench guy, I think it's fine. I think I'd be nervous trading Dalton Schultz unless you're getting back another tight end that you feel like you can start, because that is still a startable player for Toney, who, he barely played more snaps than you and I last week. It was 10 snaps.
Dalton Schultz for Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. Send it.
Okay. Last guy, Dalton. Last guy. Antonio Gibson. Kind of quietly had a pretty awesome day. Are you looking to sell high on Antonio Gibson and his top 12 RB finish in week 1?
Yes.
I say no. So good. Big disagreement to end the show.
First and foremost, I would put a lot of money that Carson Wentz doesn't throw for 4 touchdowns the rest of the season in any game. Secondly, and we talked about this a little bit on the waiver show, I am really not going to put a lot of faith in what a team does against Jacksonville's defense. It's still not good. It is very bad. It is missing a lot of pieces. And Antonio Gibson just did what Antonio Gibson does, which is he got a lot of volume. When Robinson is back,
but he got volume in the passing game, which he never does.
And we're going to get into that because I'm happy to talk about it. But his splits with him and McKissick were still pretty even. Mm-hmm. He just had a few routes that he got hit on, and he leaked out, and the catches were there. I don't want to invest in Washington, first of all. I think that when Brad Robinson comes back, it's going to be more annoying. Curtis Samuel is doing stuff out of the backfield, which is going to annoy you as well. I'm pretty low on J.D. McKissick, too, with just the way that they're running so many people in that backfield, doing so much with them, that I think it's going to be really hard to pinpoint it. And Gibson got a lot of his work on the ground, and I still think that Robinson is going to usurp him when he comes back, which could be in 3 weeks at this point.
See, that you might be right on that, but I think we have literally no way of knowing that, because we have no idea what Robinson is going to look like. We have no idea. Clearly the gunshot injury wasn't serious enough to where he's going to miss more than maybe a month, maybe more. Maybe it takes another week or two after that initial 5-week window to come back. Not really sure. He's going to play this year, it appears. So it's at least not serious enough for that to be an issue. But we just don't know what the player is going to look like coming back off of that. So I just don't think it's a lock that we get this committee with Brian Robinson if Gibson is able to put together, if he's able to stack a couple of good weeks on top of each other. Because, he was legitimately good. He had more than 50 yards rushing, which was fine, not great. But then he goes 7 for 72 in the passing game. Those numbers, along with 8 targets, are all career highs for him. So I am not counting on that again. But I think the issue with Gibson as a sell high right now is even with the uncertainty of what Robinson is going to look like when he comes back, after the offseason we've had with Gibson, is anybody really going to jump in and be like, yep, I'm paying even not top 12, but even top 15, top 18 running back value for this guy? I'm all in after 1 week. I don't know if you're going to be able to find that value. And then you kind of run into the problem of, well, Gibson is going to be a lot more valuable on your team potentially for the next month than what you get back for him in a trade. And while you would prefer him to be great at the end of the season, these games still matter too. You still get in the playoffs by winning games right now too, and he can help you do that. So I'm a little bit torn, but I think I'm holding for now and will be more open to selling in maybe week 3 if we get 2 more good Gibson games and Robinson is looming. People will know Robinson is looming, but I think just more good performances, more trust from the coaching staff might help the value that you can get, even if he doesn't play as well as he did this week.
Well, and part of my concern is I don't think the coaching staff for the Eagles wants to see 41 pass attempts out of Carson Wentz.
The Commanders.
Yeah, sorry, the Commanders. And then next week they go up against the Lions. They're not favored in that game. And then the week following they'll go up against the Eagles, who they're not favored against. And then they're going to play the Cowboys. That line is not available right now for obvious reasons. But those 2 games, I do need to see Gibson in a game where they're down, and I think they will be down by a lot in both those games.
In both of what games? Which 2? Sorry?
Lions and Eagles.
I'm not sure if they will be against the Lions. The Eagles, it could happen.
It's at the Lions, but you could be right. I'm not going to pencil that one in as a sure thing. But if they're down in those games, I do want to see Gibson. And then it just does depend on where you drafted him. Like if you drafted early when he was at that 3-4 turn before all the Brian Robinson news, you probably don't have a choice. Like you have to keep him because the investment you put in him, you're still not going to get a return on. But if you were one of those people who were drafting August 28th and you got him around 8 where he was going, I do think there's a really good shot that you don't need him on your team. He's not a starter. It's probably a bit of a headache for the other 2 running backs you drafted unless they got hurt. And then you have a really good chance at selling him now and building out a really sufficient roster. What I wouldn't want to do unless you need him is to hold until Brian Robinson gets back and see what that looks like, because it could get really messy.
Yeah, unless you hold him past this week, which I'm obviously saying I would prefer to do, and he just keeps playing better and better. And obviously we'll adjust how we feel based on how he plays the next few weeks. But
now, if it's the true Antonio Gibson experience, he will be dead next week. That's just how he works.
And he'll have another plate in the shin by week 5. Hopefully that does not happen, but that's been the experience so far. I just think back to what I said earlier, though. I just really think it comes down to, you said if you took him closer to that RB 30 range and you don't need him, well, then you could just make the argument that he is probably really helping your team right now if that's where you took him, and you can potentially get a top, let's just say 18 running back for the next couple of weeks. And it's just, what is more valuable? Can you get a return that is worth not having that guy on your roster to help you win the games? And that's going to be a league to league thing, obviously, but I would just err on the side of keeping him right now. But I obviously see the argument to selling him. The dude just had a career best receiving game, and they were ahead almost the whole game. They weren't facing a lot of negative game script and a lot of long distance, like 3rd and long type of plays where McKissick is going to be the guy, and then they get stuck in hurry up, and McKissick ends up scoring the 1-yard touchdown because there's never a sub. There wasn't any of that. That's going to happen at some point. But so I see the argument. I just think I'm holding on for right now.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I'll say, and it is a fun little experience, but how many times do you think the Washington Commanders will produce 5 fantasy relevant players on a week-to-week basis, which they did? Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Carson Wentz, and Gibson were all very relevant.
Well, and then Logan Thomas, who he didn't do much. He was fine, like 4 fantasy points, but you'd expect better days are ahead for him. as he gets further away from the ACL injury. It wasn't even he was probably not going to play in week 1, and then he played.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are a lot of guys who are probably going to score some fantasy points, and it's almost definitely never going to happen in the same week like it did this week. So there is also that.
I'm also just not high on the Washington Commanders offense, which is my other concern.
Yeah, I don't think that's a incredibly
hot take,
bold thing to say that you're not high on the Commanders offense. Dalton, anything else before we jump out of here and get ready for week 2?
Week 2, Thursday Night Football is my Josh Palmer vindication game. So I'm ready for it. I'm ready for Josh Palmer to arrive on the scene and say, I told everybody so. And if he doesn't, I didn't say anything.
if you're watching this live, we have a waiver wire video on the YouTube channel right now. Josh Palmer is in that list, just perhaps not as high as you might expect in said list. So go check that out. And thank you guys so much for listening to us on episode 82 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on the Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, the link for all of those things and the show notes as always. And we'll be back next week, recapping week 2 and once again looking at the most important fantasy football storylines. Thank you guys so much for listening.